don't want to run scared anymore. If I keep on faking it like this, I know I'll regret it. So from now on, no matter what, no more lying to myself. Thank you, both of you.
Don't mention it. Happy trails, cowgirl, or, cowboy.
Cowgirl is fine, because I'm a girl. Because I'm a girl. Because I'm a girl.
Did you catch all that? Do you need me to play it again? All right. You see, that one line right there is the result of over 20 years of culture and creativity. It may very well be the most culturally impactful moment in the history of fighting games, maybe even of video games overall. And I'm going to make a bold claim here, and by the end of this video, I think you're going to agree with me. Because you see that cowgirl over there? She might not just be the most impactful character in Guilty Gear. She might not be just the most impactful character in the entire Arc System Works catalog, or even the fighting game genre as a whole. She might be one of the most impactful video game characters of all time. So let's talk a little bit about Bridget, her history, and how we got here. All right, roll the tape. Just to say it on the front end, I'm going to be referring to Bridget with she and her pronouns throughout the video, regardless of what era of the character that I'm talking about. Like the metal music genre that it pulls heavily from, Guilty Gear is no stranger to queerness. For example, Venom is a gay man. Also, over 20 years ago, in a 1998 newsletter, series creator Daisuke Ishiwatari responded to a fan question about Testament's gender with, and I quote, "They're androgynous. In fact, they've transcended human existence, just like me." End quote. Baiken's initial design also came about when Ishiwatari mistook the character Kenshin Himura for a woman and, correctly, thought an androgynous samurai character would be sick as hell. And even in her modern design, Baiken refers to herself with ore, a gruff masculine pronoun that's typically not used by women. So for over 20 years, queerness has been built into the foundation of the Guilty Gear franchise. But even with all that in mind, Bridget has always been on a different level. Debuting in 2002 as part of the third installment in the Guilty Gear series, Ishiwatari initially created Bridget as a cute archetype character to contrast against the rest of the existing cast. But wanting to add something to the concept to make Bridget stand out from similar designs, Ishiwatari decided that Bridget would debut in the series as a guy. And what might have seemed like a small bit of design at the time would end up leaving a crater-sized impact, not only on the Guilty Gear series, but also on popular culture for decades to come. You don't even have to know anything about her backstory to see how Bridget stands out against the rest of the cast. In a fighting game where most of the characters have some kind of weapon like a sword, a scythe, a giant anchor, a scalpel, or whatever the hell it is that Dizzy has going on, Bridget shows up to each fight with a yo-yo and her teddy bear Roger. As you play the game, the differences become even more stark. According to Ishiwatari, Bridget was an exceptionally difficult character to animate, having twice the animation frames of some other characters, and having gone through several rounds of revisions before landing on what they imagined for the character. And just look at her vibe in her idol animation. Her moveset is full of a playful blend of yo-yo tricks and clumsiness. She doesn't seem like a hardened fighter, and her playstyle even caters to avoiding conflict by staying in the air as much as possible. In her win poses, she might even drop her yo-yo on her own head or get embarrassed after realizing that her celebration pose has ended up flashing her bike shorts at the camera. She comes off as a fish out of water that, while competent, doesn't seem totally aware of herself, and that vibe is further expanded on in her story. In a far-off, imaginary, unknowable land known as England, there is a village with a superstition that having twin boys will bring about misfortune. Bridget was born shortly after her twin brother. Per tradition, Bridget would either need to be put up for adoption or put to death. Unable to accept either option, Bridget's parents decided to raise her as a girl and then never speak of it again. Fast forward to the start of Guilty Gear XX, where she makes her debut. Bridget has had a complicated upbringing, to say the least. Despite the efforts of her parents, she still sees herself as a man, but presents femme for the sake of her parents, who, despite everything, she does love. After seeing a wanted poster for Dizzy, Bridget gets the idea to become a bounty hunter because, after all, if she could make it work in a gruff, masculine profession like bounty hunting, then she could prove both her masculinity and do away with the village's superstition. You know, two birds, one yo-yo. There are some forks in the story, but generally Bridget is assumed to be a girl by everyone she meets with the sole exceptions of Jam and Potemkin. In every case, she politely corrects the person, holding firm in her own identity as a man. When Johnny hits on her in an interaction, she shows no interest in him. When she encounters Baiken, she actually stops and asks for coaching on how she might be able to present more masculinely. Canonically, Bridget turns out to be better at making friends than bounty hunting, and ultimately doesn't end up capturing Dizzy. And that's it. Up until a few weeks ago, that was the extent of Bridget's presence in the main story entries in the Guilty Gear titles. Bridget is a character that is assigned male at birth, and resolutely identified as a man despite holding an outwardly femme presentation. Even though her role in the story may have been small, the cultural impact from her appearance is hard to overstate. Bridget's complicated background with gender made her an instant sensation among fans of the game, and even made fans out of people who had never heard of Guilty Gear before. Magazines that published fan art were flooded with submissions of the character, and she became and remains a popular cosplay among both men and women. In the years since her introduction, games media both in Japan and abroad have acknowledged that this clumsy bounty hunter is not even just iconic within the Guilty Gear franchise, but within gaming as a whole. In Japan, the character's gender made her particularly popular among fans of otokonoko characters. The term itself is a play on the word otokonoko, where the kanji for child at the end is substituted for the kanji for daughter or girl. This archetype of femme-presenting boys and men gradually rose in popularity in the later 2000s. And within that subculture, Bridget isn't just iconic, Bridget is the icon. In the Western memescape, Bridget's gender has had a similarly large, albeit complicated impact. To some, she is a queer icon in video games held aloft and celebrated. If you were on the internet in the mid-2000s and onward, you've probably seen some version of this meme. Everyone is gay for Bridget. This meme is actually how I found out about the Guilty Gear series, and I suspect that I'm not alone in that. Over the years, Bridget's cultural legacy has mostly revolved around how this character appeals to men. Memes go about talking about how people are going to go gay for Bridget, or how Bridget has made someone gay. And those have remained part of the atmosphere around the character. And if you're still doubting the prolificness both of these memes and of the character, just check out this 2007 political headline from Wired about proposed internet regulation by former presidential candidate John McCain. And this is where I have to talk about something a little bit more serious. Bridget has become so closely connected to the trope of a trap, or some people might say the T-slur, that I don't think I could finish this script without touching on it. The idea of a trap is based in the homo and transphobic paranoia that femme-presenting queer people like trans women, drag queens, or non-binary people are only doing so to deceive and ultimately emasculate straight men. And look, if I wanted to deceive straight guys, I would be going on Rogan and trying to sell you brain pills or something. Regardless, this brainworm has been used in court to argue that men have been justified in assaulting and even killing queer people for the crime of having someone else be attracted to them. And it's called the trans panic defense. The connection of Bridget to memes that make light of this reality have given some fans, including me, complicated feelings to say the least. But what about within the Guilty Gear fanbase? Well, in an official poll held nearly a decade after her debut, Bridget remained the most popular character in the franchise. Unfortunately, though, she didn't make it into the roster for the third installment of the game, Xrd. But when Arc System Works decided to hold a contest in arcades to decide which character would be included in a future update, Bridget only narrowly lost to Dizzy. And now, you didn't hear this from me, but I've heard rumors that maybe Arc System Works might have put their thumbs on the scale at the last minute, having underestimated Bridget's enduring popularity and already having begun some level of development on Dizzy ahead of her debut at Evolution the following year. Despite her strong performance and popularity, Bridget ultimately ended up sitting out for Xrd, but when another poll went out relatively recently asking which characters might be included in a fourth installment, Bridget dominated Japanese fan polls despite her long absence from the series. And now we fast forward yet again to the year 2022, the year of our Lord and Savior Luigi Mario, where Bridget is reintroduced to a roaring crowd following Guilty Gear Strive's finals at Evolution 2022. Interestingly though, the biography posted to the website ahead of the character's release carefully avoided the use of any pronouns for the character. But it didn't take long for data miners to get to work and figure out the big reveal. It wasn't just that Bridget is coming back. She was coming back with a blue hoodie and pronouns, she and her if you please. And this gender-bending icon was now canonically a trans woman. The story of Guilty Gear Strive picks up 7 years after the events of XX. Bridget has everything that she said that she wanted. She's a successful bounty hunter with fame, fortune, and admiration to spare. Her win quotes even suggest that she's basically an influencer, and popular enough that she can tell the King of Aurelia that it's not cool to take photographs, but if he asks really nicely that maybe she'll give him an autograph. Yet, despite getting everything that she thought that she wanted, she still feels that something is missing in her life and is searching for purpose. In her arcade mode, she talks with the Secretary of Defense, Gold Lewis Dickinson, about her fears of regret and that sense of enemy, that something isn't right. You can read Gold Lewis's own disclosure a number of ways, but his own reflections on his sense of regret in his own life, running away from himself, and alienation from his family sounds to me like an older gay man saddled with regret from his own history of repression. In a later conversation with everyone's favorite sitcom dad, Kai Kisuke, it frames his own coming out as a gear with language that is unmistakably similar to a trans person's own coming out. And at the climax of it all, Kai and Gold Lewis emphatically support Bridget, giving her the space and affirmation to admit something to herself.
But what if I make the wrong decision?
You got your whole life ahead of you, kid. Gotta learn to take a hit sometime.
And there are helping hands right in front of you.
I don't want to run scared anymore. If I keep on faking it like this, I know I'll regret it. So from now on, no matter what, no more lying to myself. Thank you, both of you.
Don't mention it. Happy trails, cowgirl, or, cowboy.
Cowgirl is fine, because I'm a girl.
And we're back at the beginning, but with a little bit more context to why this moment is so significant. This one line has been built up over 20 plus years of characterization, fan culture, and even academic writing on the intersection of gender and media. In deciding to live as a woman, not because of her parents or a superstition, but for the sake of her own happiness, Bridget has come out as trans. And that transition even shows in her animation. Gone is that sense of clumsiness. Instead, Bridget is confident, comfortable, and happy. And this is a messy and complicated story, but so are the lives of real queer people, and I think that that's resonated so heavily with queer communities, especially on the internet. Now, I started this video saying that Bridget was one of the most impactful characters in all of video games, but I never really stopped to define what impact is. You can look back at years of polling and fan art and cosplays, but that seems more like popularity than impact to me. Over the last few weeks, I have seen a gushing joy from the trans people in my life, the likes of which I have never seen before. Genuine trans joy has been hard to come by lately, and every step forward seems like it's shortly followed by 2 steps back. And I've seen people that have never expressed any interest in the fighting game genre talk about wanting to learn Strive particularly for this character. And even if they aren't interested in learning how to play the game, I've seen people talk about how finding out Bridget and finding out about her history has resonated with them and their own experiences with gender. It's also important to highlight how direct this scene is. So often, queerness is told through subtext, and as queer people, we often settle for crumbs or have to maybe bend the story a little bit in order to see ourselves. Direct, undeniable representation is rare. And for trans people, the story gets a little grim, as the history of trans representation often centers pain, tragedy, humiliation, and fetishation. But as the meme goes, even though we've had a character look into the camera and say, undeniably, I am transgender, there are still some folks who aren't happy and all too willing to try to deny that. Mercifully, the only people who don't seem happy about this development are a small number of weirdos that insist that Bridget being trans is a localization error. So let's listen to that scene again in Japanese.
いや、お坊ちゃんか?
お嬢ちゃんでいいですよ。うちは女の子ですから。
You see, that is about as one-to-one as a Japanese to English translation can get. So when that first effort failed, someone even went through the effort of trying to make up an email framing it as being from Arc System Works customer support, and ended up getting called out by the ArcSys official Twitter. You can't even make this shit up. And this is the part where I'm gonna get messy and personal. Bridget has been an important character for almost half of my life now. High school was not a good time for me. I ended up going to an all-boys high school, knowing that I would rather be a girl. As an effeminate boy, I was bullied really brutally in grade school, so badly that my parents pulled me out of public education. But the thought of hurting my parents and the shame of my own desire to be more feminine kept me closeted. And it was in high school that I actually first found Bridget and ultimately the Guilty Gear series via memes. And the culture around Bridget, as well as the character herself, gave me some hope that maybe I might be able to find my own niche in gender that might be able to work for me. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that had it not been for that, I might not be around making this video. Much later in my adult life, I must have seemed like the outward image of success to other people. I was on the cusp of finishing a doctorate, I was accomplished, handsome, I was even engaged to my now ex-fiancé. But inside I knew that there was something wrong, something missing. And eventually the fear of regret became stronger than my desire to stay closeted. Kind of like Bridget says in that clip, once I started thinking about things as what am I doing for the sake of my future self, there was really only one path forward. Then a bunch of stuff happened, and now I'm a deer on the internet. It's kind of funny where life takes you sometimes. And one more thing that's really stuck out to me is how young some of the people celebrating this character development are. Some of them weren't even alive when Bridget debuted as a character and still were able to pull an intergenerational joy out of how well all of this was handled. I showed this arcade mode to a friend of mine who had no background with the series or the character, and I watched him light up with how joyous that final scene in the arcade mode is. I've even seen some viral tweets go around with people talking about how finding and connecting with Bridget's narrative gave them the courage to start their own transitions over the last couple of weeks. And if that doesn't count for real impact, I don't know what does. There are people around today whose lives are genuinely better because of the connection, strength, and resilience that they found through this goofy girl and her yo-yo. It's hard to express a little bit of how it really feels to have this character reappear like this in my life, and in some ways, it feels kind of like meeting an old friend again, but now you're both girls and you kind of laugh about it. And on top of that, the way the voice actors, directors, and writers handled this is nuanced and sensitive in ways that I would really never expect from a video game, especially one with such sparse dialogue, never mind a fighting game. But this is the Guilty Gear franchise, and at the end of it all, I guess I'm really just happy to see my friend again, and I'm excited that a whole new generation of people get to meet them too. And that's what I got. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and Yeah, see you next time. Take care.